you hear me?
Yes.
There we go. Welcome everybody. Thank you very, very much for coming. We appreciate you taking your amazing time and spending it with us tonight. Pensions is a fabulous hot topic. It can be contentious, and that's not the intention of tonight. Tonight is here to educate and to share information and to hold your thumbs up in the back there when you hold your
Yeah,
thumbs
to
up.
say stop turning the lights out. Oh, you might want it dim when you do your thing. Okay.
Okay, it's all good. You know, I think we went for many years and just assumed that all was well and pensions were what they were and helpers would take care of it for us. And I think we have a great opportunity to understand, you know, what's gone on over the years, not blame everybody and anybody, and just have an education campaign to figure out what's cooking. Our city council assigned an ad hoc, and for those unfamiliar, an ad hoc is two of our 5 city council members, so it's not all of us, it's Victoria, Leslie, and I, to collaborate, and she'll introduce our speaker. But they're essentially looking to have more information and recommendations from us, and we decided, you know, we're going to start this with a public meeting to start a conversation as we create our ad hoc, and the intention is to not dive straight into solutions, to educate, and to have those that are interested potentially collaborate with and help us, not only tonight, but as we go through a series of meetings. And with that, thank you so much for coming. I hope you managed to get a treat in the back so I don't have to take them all home. And on that, Victoria Lizzie. Oh, excuse me, council member.
I know, it's kind of funny to call each other by our last name. I guess we'll go this way. Good. Thanks so much for coming out, everybody. So I love being engaged in our community, and I love groups like this. As you guys know, I'll talk forever on that, so people who know.
And your mouth.
Next to my mouth?
Yes, so we can hear you.
I'm sorry.
Scream.
Scream?
Scream.
Me?
Yes.
Okay, so Michael kind of mentioned our ad hoc. So the role of an ad hoc committee is to really allow for an in-depth look on a particular topic kind of outside of the full city council structure, and then for us to come back with findings and recommendations for the full council to be able to kind of discuss and come up with some decision making. Councilmember Kemps, who will now just be Michael. But we felt, as he mentioned, we felt it was just very important to have the input of all the stakeholders in our city. You know, and we kind of felt that we needed some experience in helping us lead the effort. There's lots of pension consultants out there. And I looked at the work of a few of them, and it just seemed to me that, that the work, there was kind of a cookie cutter set of recommendations regardless of the city that they were doing the work for, big, small, affluent, not affluent, you know. So we were kind of looking for something that was a little bit different from that. And Retirement Security Initiative kind of fit the bill for us. We liked their approach of bringing all the stakeholders to the table. So that's, you know, current employees, retired employees, residents, business leaders. And with the goal of educating all the parties on what can and can't be done, and, you know, for me, and the consequences of not doing anything. So I would describe RSI, as they're known, part think tank and part consultant, and that appealed to me. That's kind of how I'm wired. And I like kind of research-based decision making, and that's what they're all about. So I really, I liked that. RSI does not charge for their work, as former treasurer, another reason why I liked them. But lots of people are knocking on their door, trying to get them to help, and we're just thrilled that they will work with Palos Verdes Estates, and we're thrilled to have them here. So let me give you a little intro. Retirement Security Initiative, or RSI, is a national bipartisan advocacy organization focused on protecting and ensuring the fairness and solvency of public sector retirement plans. RSI works to inform and educate public and policy, educate the public and policy leaders, support policy development, and build strategies for fair and sustainable retirement plans. So now I'm going to embarrass Pete a little bit. I said that you're A bio always sounds so awesome when somebody else reads it. You know? So it is my pleasure to introduce Pete Constant, who's the Chief Executive Officer of RSI. So Pete began his career as a police officer for the city of San Jose for 11 years as a police officer. He was a council member in San Jose from 2007 to 2014, and during that time he served as a trustee on the two on the board of the two pension plans that city has. Prior to RSI, Pete was a director of the Pension Integrity Project and a senior fellow at the Reason Foundation. And at RSI, Pete designs and implements strategic plans, leads the organization of advocacy efforts, manages the day-to-day operations. So as you can tell, Pete brings a wealth of knowledge of pension reform and experience to RSI and to us, and I'm just confident he's going to be a great resource for Palos Verdes Estates. So let's welcome Pete Constant.
I need as much rope as possible because I like to wander. So. Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here today. I have kind of a lengthy presentation. Victoria stole a couple of my slides, but I'm going to go over a couple things. So why are we here? I think Michael and Victoria touched on this. The City Council decided to create this ad hoc committee to look at pension issues. And most importantly, the ad hoc committee has taken an approach to reach out to stakeholders, as they mentioned, and have a series of meetings. And today is really the start of that. Already today, I've been here all day. We've met with union leadership from the Police Officers Union, from the non-public safety unions. We met with active employees. We met with retirees. We met with the executive team, and we've gone through versions of this presentation, as well as the presentation I did to the City Council, so that everybody can kind of get the same information and understand what the status is before we start talking about solutions. Now, the one thing that wasn't pointed out is you only see 2 council members here. There's a reason for that. The other council members would like to come, but when you have an ad hoc committee, you can't have a majority of the council members present, because if they came, it would violate California's Brown Act and the Open Meeting Act. So the ad hoc's charge is to go out there and get information and bring it to the council. The other council members, I've spoken to, they wanted you guys to make sure they're not here because they're avoiding the topic or don't want to talk about it. It's that because of the structure of these things, they couldn't be here. Now, what we want to do, these meetings, whether it's the employees, the retirees, or the folks that live in the community, this is to inform, to engage, to solicit input. So we're here to ask for your input. There is no such thing as a dumb question or a bad idea that we should look at. Now, there are questions that might be too complicated for me to answer, and I'm going to have to seek an answer for you, but we will record those and get answers back out to you. There will be ideas that sound good, but when we do the analysis, they don't really move the needle or make any change. That doesn't mean we don't want to hear about them. We want to take them in, but we want to be thoughtful about the input that we receive and make sure that whatever solution is ultimately put in place, it actually addresses the issues that we're going to talk about today. So we already got a brief introduction of RSI. I think it's important that you know that we are a bipartisan organization. There's a lot of nonprofits that promote the fact that they're nonpartisan, but when it gets to policy issues, there's no such thing as nonpartisan. We have a bipartisan board. We have a very broad set of ideals that come to our board. Everything from the former Lieutenant Governor of New York, Dick Ravitch, who's a pretty liberal person who helped New York through their financial crisis in the 70s and 80s, is on our board. We have Lois Scott, who is the former CFO for the city of Chicago, who went in with Rahm Emanuel when he was elected to help him with the financial challenges in the city of Chicago. We have Chuck Reed, the former mayor of San Jose, who I had the pleasure of working with when I was on the San Jose City Council. We have, who am I forgetting? Jim Spiato, who's a municipal finance expert nationally. He's an attorney that helped craft the state of the municipal bankruptcy laws that exist today across the nation. He was very involved in all of those issues. And then we have Dan Lillenquist, the former state senator from Utah, who's on our board, who worked on similar issues when he was in the legislature in Utah. And then of course we have me, who you heard about. I bring a few different perspectives. That is a retiree. Let me say right up front, I'm a retiree. I get 2 pension checks. I have a 50% pension from my time as a police officer that comes from the San Jose system, and I have a 16% pension from CalPERS. So I have a 66% pension. So when I'm talking about percentages of pensions, I'm in the system just like the employees here. In fact, we're in the same CalPERS system. As mentioned, I've been a trustee on pension boards. I've been an employee, I've been a police officer. I have a few different perspectives that I bring to the table. We do all our work aligned with our guiding principles, and they're up here. I'm not going to read them word for word, but what we believe is fair, sustainable, predictable retirement benefits. We believe that retirement plans that are offered to employees should put them on the path to retirement security, regardless of tenure. So if someone comes for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, they should have a retirement vehicle that helps them get to retirement security. That benefits should be fully funded. You should make promises that you're not willing to pay for, and that you should pay for those promises as the employees earn the benefit. Try and keep it within the same service life of the employee. And if you have unfunded liabilities, which we're going to talk a lot about today, those unfunded liabilities have to be paid down in a reasonable amount of time. Reasonable is a fuzzy word. What's reasonable to me might not be reasonable to you. I can tell you, give you a couple of extremes. Hawaii, they put their unfunded pension debt on a 99-year amortization. It was like taking out a 99-year mortgage, and they just acknowledged we never plan to pay this off. That's not reasonable. Neither is expecting you to write a check tomorrow to get out of the pension system and pay off your unfunded liability. Reasonable is where that point is in between that works for the community in which you live, Palos Verdes Estate. So when I talk about reasonable, that's what we're talking about. We believe that the decision-making and the management should be transparent, open, and non-political. But let's face it, all these decisions are made in a political environment. We just hope to minimize the politics in them. The solutions that we're seeking should be designed around the problems. That seems pretty simple, but all too often in government, you have a problem and a solution, and they rarely connect to each other. Sometimes they make a new problem, sometimes they solve a different problem, but very rarely are they connected. And if you really want to be successful at this, you need to connect them. And then finally, it needs to be done with input of all the stakeholders. If you work for the city, you're a stakeholder. If you retired from the city, you're a stakeholder. If you pay taxes in the city, you're a stakeholder. If you think you might get a job in the city in the future, you're a stakeholder. Those are the people that should be discussing these issues so that we come to a resolution. That's when you come up with the good solutions that have buy-in from everyone. So that's our goal. Sometimes it's a little bit too altruistic and we don't achieve that goal, but that's the goal of our organization. And the last thing is we don't expect that you can rubber stamp a solution from another community and just put it on top of, take Arizona's fix and put it in California or Rhode Island, because that's not going to work. State and local governments have a responsibility to the residents to provide for the safety, health, welfare, and quality of life. That's their job. That's really what they're charged to do. That's what you pay your taxes for. They do that by hiring people to provide services to you, the residents, and those employees that work. The government has an obligation to make sure that if they offer a pension plan, which they all do, and they should, that plan should be sustainable, fiscally sound, and responsibly managed, so that after they work and they earn their pension, they can actually count on that pension in retirement. So we work across the nation. We do big projects, we do small projects. These are some of the big state-based projects, and the only one I'm really going to harp on is the top one, Arizona, because the model in Arizona is the model that we believe has been the most successful. And what happened there is the firefighters union in the state went to the state legislature, the RSI got involved, and we worked with the unions and all of the stakeholders over a one-year-long period, and we analyzed a bunch of different options. In the end, what the firefighters proposed didn't pencil out. What stakeholders from the community had didn't pencil out, but we found a solution that worked for everyone. It's saving hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And after 6 or 8 pension reforms that were passed by the legislature and overturned by the Supreme Court, this one has stuck. And it's been there because everybody had a hand in the solution, and not everyone was happy, but everyone was satisfied that it was going to do the job. That was a bipartisan, both sides of the political aisle, business, labor, everybody got together and did it. The work in Pennsylvania, Colorado have all been bipartisan. The work in Michigan was not bipartisan. They've done many reforms. The first one was very partisan, bitter fight. It passed, and then after that, everyone got together and said, okay, now that we have it, how do we make this the best plan possible? And they've done several incremental changes to make it more palatable, make it work for everybody, and other unions like the state police have come on board and made some changes to their plan. So that's what we hope to do when we're out there working. So the first thing we've got to do is you got to understand what a pension is and what a pension is not. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the national perspective on what's going on pensions, because you are not alone. It's not just that Palos Verdes estates screwed something up. There's an issue out there, and we want to make sure that you understand that it's not just because some people here did something wrong, and it's not your employee's fault, but there's an issue and it needs to be addressed. So, there are defined benefit pension plans. That is where the employer tells the employee, by the way, I do see some people taking notes. We will provide this presentation to anybody who wants it. You can get the whole thing, so don't worry about catching everything. So, I want to make sure you know that. The employer makes a promise to their employees that when you retire, you can expect this level of benefit in retirement. And currently, the most popular way it's done is a percentage of pay. You can expect 70% of your pay, 80% of your pay, whatever the case is. They make a promise, and your benefit is based on that promise and goes forward. You also can have defined contribution plans, and that's where the employer makes a promise, but the promise is how much they're going to give you with each paycheck. And they might give you 5% of pay, 2% of pay, 12% of pay, whatever the case is. They put in money, you put in money, and you're responsible for managing it because they define what they're going to contribute to your retirement, and you go forward in your retirement. There are what's called cash balance plans. Cash balance plans are similar to both. They have some of the features of defined benefit, some of the features of defined contribution, but essentially the government gives, or the employer gives, the employee contributions into their plan, the employee makes contributions into their plan. They're held in a notional count in that person's name, and then the employer manages all the investments and guarantees a certain return. Any returns over the guarantee are split between the employer and the employee, and anything at or below is guaranteed up to a certain level, and that level can change, and that's in place in a few states. There are hybrid plans. A hybrid can have any of those three in combination. If you know anyone who works for the federal government, they're in a hybrid plan. They get a 1.5% defined contribution, so after 30 years they get about 45% of their pay, and defined benefit, and then they get a defined contribution that they can invest over time to add to that. The two together, often along with Social Security, become their retirement package. And then there are several plans now where there's an employee choice. The city or the state may offer one or more of these plans and say, when you get hired, you get to choose. Because somebody who's coming to be a 30-year employee might have a different idea of what's going to provide for them in retirement than someone who's coming for 4 years. So that is another option. Now what you have, all of these plans can offer retirement security or retirement insecurity depending on how they are built and what the promises are. They all have risk. The difference is who bears the risk. Is it all on the government, all on the employee, or is it a shared risk? Now what you have here is CalPERS, which is a defined benefit plan. Most public employees, 97+% of public employees in the state are in a defined benefit plan. But a defined benefit plan is designed to give a specified amount of money to an employee upon retirement, and that amount of money continues throughout their life and their surviving beneficiary, usually a spouse. And that depends on type of plan. Some CalPERS plans don't have beneficiary coverage, some do. That part changes depending on the contract the city has. They are designed to be pre-funded. They are designed so that every week the employer and the employee put money into the retirement system that is invested, commingled and invested, so that by the time they retire, the money is there to fund their retirement fully until they draw their last retirement check. And if you're the retiree, you want that to be when you're 120 years old. You know, hopefully a long, long time. Now, it's a simple formula that defines this. Now, I'm first going to give you a generic formula, and then I'm going to bring it a little more specific to Palos Verdes Estates. So they take a benefit multiplier. This can be 1.5%, 2%, 2.25%, 2.7%, 3%. It could be any number, but it's a multiplier. They multiply the multiplier times how long you worked, times your final average salary, and that calculation determines your retirement benefit. So in this case, if someone worked in a 2% plan for 25 years, $100,000 pay, they would have a $62,500 retirement benefit that would be in year one and would pay going forward with cost of living adjustments periodically along the way. Oh, I should say, none of these are exactly firm. Years of service has been fuzzy because in the past, airtime was allowed. You could buy time where you didn't serve, or military time could be adjusted. Most of those have been eliminated in California. Final average salary does not mean the salary you made on your final day of employment. It can mean different things, and we're going to get into that here in a second. So, Palos Verdes Estates has 4 retirement plans. Essentially, there's a split between public safety officers and non-public safety officers. And then the state reformed the pension systems. Governor Brown did that. It was called the PEPRA system right around 2013. So anyone hired after that is either in the public safety or the miscellaneous employee PEPRA plan. And they have different benefits. So you can see public safety classic plan, 3% multiplier, retirement age of 50, 1-year final average salary, 2% COLA. And you can just read down at all the different ones down to a PEPRA employee at 2% at 62, 3-year final average salary. Final average salary means your highest pay periods either in the 1-year or 3-year period. So they average it out. It might not be your last year, it might be your second to last year, it could be your third to last year. Whatever it is, it's averaged either on a 1-year basis or a 3-year basis. So for example, in your city, the public works director gets a 2% multiplier. If they work 30 years at a salary of $155,254, which is the current salary, their retirement benefit will be $93,152 per year, plus the cost of living adjustments, not the first year after they're retired, but starting the second year going up. That's how they're calculated. Every employee is the same in the benefit multiplier, but when they decide to retire, they can retire at 24 years on, 25 years on, 32 years on. The maximum you can multiply is 30 years, and then their final average salary. So, when the city gets the bill for these pensions, the bill is bifurcated. It's got 2 bills on it. The first bill is the normal cost, and this is where we're going to start to get technical. The normal cost is the cost it would normally take to pay for the benefit as somebody earns it. So this year, the employee's coming to work, they're earning a year in the system. How much money do you have to put away to pay for that year of service? So it's a forward-looking number. That cost is shared between the employer and the employee. The sharing ratio changes whether you're a classic member or a PEPRA member, but it is shared. The PEPRA member, all new hires, it's a 50-50 share. If it costs $10 each, put 5 in. So it's a split share. I can't remember the ratio on the other employees, but it's closer to a 1/3, 2/3 type split. There's a split, it's a ratio split. Then there's an unfunded, potentially an unfunded liability cost. Because remember I said the normal cost is a projection of what it will cost. They're not always accurate in what that will cost. So they do a reconciliation on a regular basis. And I'm going to show you some of those in a little bit. But they look backwards and say, how did we do if we underestimated the cost for any one of a dozen different assumptions we made, and there's an unfunded portion of the pension? That portion of the pension bill is the sole responsibility of the employer, and which is essentially the taxpayers when you have government employees. Now there's a reason behind this, because the government's the one that calculates the rate. That's kind of how it all happened. So you have normal cost is new cost, projecting forward. Unfunded liability is old cost, what you estimated that you were wrong. Unfunded liability is mostly right now all negative. It's money that's owed, but you could also have a overfunded asset where you have a negative unfunded liability. We haven't had to worry about that in a while, but hopefully that'll be a problem for a future discussion that one of my grandkids will have. So, now, just to rehash this, the employees who come to work every day, they make a contribution out of every paycheck that is their portion of the normal cost. The employer, which is your city, they use different names. There's acronyms for everything in government. Sometimes it's referred to as ARC, sometimes it's referred to as ADEC. ADEC stands for the Annual Determined Employer Contribution. ARC stands for the Annual Required Contribution. I just say, hey, it's the employer contribution. But when you're reading things, if you hear ADEC or ARC, that's what they're talking about. How much does the government, in this case, pay? That's the total of both the employer's share of the normal cost and the amortized cost of the unfunded liabilities. And we're going to get into this in more detail, but essentially, once you have a large unfunded liability, which you do, it's amortized like a mortgage over a long period of time, and you make payments on it until you retire the debt. Now, in a fully funded, properly calculated plan, it's a relatively straightforward process. The employee puts in about 13% of the contributions if they're a legacy employee or a classic employee. The agency that employs them puts in about 25%. And then the balance of the benefit comes from investment earnings. Because after all, you're putting in this money today for someone who's going to retire in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And they might not draw that benefit immediately. And then they're going to be drawing it for a number of years. So you literally have decades of accumulation of assets to make this money. So that's where the majority should come from. But the key is that's only if the plan is fully funded. And as you're going to see, and you've probably heard, the CalPERS fund is not fully funded. So you don't have all that money working. So when you have a raging economy, if you only have 70% of your assets taking advantage of that, you're not going to make the money as quickly as you would if you had 100 or 110%. CalPERS has not been achieving their rate of return. And how that has affected you is for several years, the interest cost on the debt has been more than the debt payments. That's called negative amortization. If it sounds familiar, that's what the whole subprime mortgage crisis was about. When you make your payments every day, and let me be very clear, the city and the employees have made every single payment that CalPERS has asked of them. But because of the way CalPERS administers the fund, how they calculate the benefit, how they amortize debt, the methods they use to amortize the debt, it has been in negative amortization. So every year you owe a little bit more than you did the year before. And payments on this debt are going to increase for a number of years. And we're going to talk about that. I'm going to show you nice pictures to show all this. So, before we get to your details, I want to talk about the national perspective, because you are not alone. I used the analogy earlier. I know it doesn't make you feel any better. If you're outside and it's freezing cold and you don't have a jacket on, it doesn't make you feel any better that the person next to you forgot their jacket as well. You're still cold. It's kind of the same way with pension debt. The fact that somebody else owes the same or more than you is not real comforting, because you still got to make your payment. So the fuzzy part is you can calculate this debt in a number of different ways, because what essentially you have to do is you have to take each employee. So the actuary does this every year for every one of the CalPERS employees, and it calculates how old were they when they were hired, how long do we expect them to live, when do we expect them to retire, how many do we expect them to be married, how much do we expect their earnings to grow over the years, what age will they retire at, how long will they live until they expire and they're no longer drawing a pension, how long will their surviving spouse live, and they calculate all that to the end, and they say, okay, at the end we're going to put out X amount of dollars, but now we have to discount it back to today to determine how much money we should have in the bank today to pay for it. So it's a very complicated, nonlinear calculation that takes a lot of assumptions. So here you can see the Federal Reserve Bank that tracks this nationally, they had calculated that it was a national problem of $2 trillion, and then they recalculated it and went back and it jumped 2.3 trillion, and they say it's a 4-point-something trillion dollar problem. That's the Federal Reserve Bank. If you look across the nation, this is an aggregate average of all pension funds in the nation. The national average back, the most current data of aggregation was 2015, was 72%, and that's right about at that time where your public safety plan was, and your non-public safety plan was just a couple of points ahead. So you're not that far out of the national average. I think what's instructive to see here is a lot of times people talk about the financial crisis of the dot-com bust and the Great Recession in 2008 as driving the funding levels, but you can see this period covers all that time and the funding ratios didn't change that drastically. And we're going to, again, get down to your plans here in a minute. So the reason, this goes from 1990 to 2015. This here is the financial markets. I just highlighted some years so you could see where they are. I picked 1999 because that's right before the first recession hit. So you can see what financial markets have done during the time, just so you can kind of see. The markets have definitely rebounded, and as you know, this shows the Dow at about just under 26, and we know it's higher than that now. So the concern is what's going to happen in the market in the future. So McKinsey Company, they're a national consultancy company, they did an analysis and they looked back and said, if we look at the last 30 years and the last 100 years, the blue bars are 30 years, it's really hard to read, gray bar, but you can see where the number is the 100-year mark. What did the financial markets and bond and equities do during that period? And you can see whether you're looking at US equities and bonds or European equities, you can see the different returns over the past years. Then they looked at what do we expect going forward in a growth scenario or a slow growth scenario looking forward. And they say in the next 20 years that they believe the lower part is a slow growth recovery in the kind of grayish color and the more blue color. I'm kind of colorblind, I think. I don't know if that's blue. But anyway, that higher, lighter color is a growth economy. And what you see is very suppressed returns expected in the future compared to the past. That's kind of the takeaway from this. If you look at the Wall Street Journal did an analysis and said, if you want to get 7.5% return on your investments, which at the time they did this was what CalPERS was hoping to get. In 1995, you could put your money in just bonds, relatively safe, and get your return. And for those of you who aren't investment professionals, standard deviation is a measure of risk that they use in the financial world. 6% standard deviation is a pretty low risk. So then they fast forward and said, what would you have to do 10 years later to achieve the same return in the market? And what they found is you had to increase your risk by about 50% and bring in other asset classes to try and achieve the rate of return. And then they fast forwarded 10 more years to 2015. And the key takeaway here is the standard deviation has nearly tripled. So the risk in your portfolio is significantly higher in order to achieve that return. I bring that up because as you look nationally at the pension plans, you can see how over this time period, how they allocate their assets in their investments have moved very similar to this. This is kind of an inverted chart. Down below zero is surplus, that's why it's green, and above is red, because it does look like a mountain of debt, and it is a mountain of debt. So you can see that before the first recession, plans were overfunded. After the first recession and the recovery, they came back to almost even. During this time period, they have all reacted similarly. The only thing that has changed over that time is the risk-free rate of return in relation to their assumed rate of return. That's my theory, that's why I keep coming back to it.
Times aren't good enough. Is a year all the way to the right, 2015 or 2019?
It's 15 in most of these, and some of them may be later, because I grabbed them out of different reports
Thanks.
that were done by our partners at Reason. So, my main thing here is, you're no different than anyone else in the nation. You're definitely no different than anyone else in California, whether they're in the CalPERS plan, a 1937 Act county plan, or independent plans, because cities like Los Angeles, San Jose, San Diego, San Francisco, Fresno, I think San Bernardino, a bunch of them have their own independent plans. So, just to dispel some myths, a lot of people say, well, if we're at 80% funded, aren't we healthy? Well, you're not at 80% yet, but you're getting close. But there is a misnomer out there by a number of pension fund administrators and elected officials to say, well, we're just going to shoot for a target of 80. Well, let me tell you first, from a practical standpoint, if you shoot for 80, you'll never hit 100. But most importantly, the American Academy of Actuaries have published 2 different issue briefs to say, no, that is not correct. The only target is 100%. In fact, the target should be higher because you have economic cycles. They go up and they go down. If you want to be prepared for the down, you have to have surpluses in the up. A healthy plan should oscillate, not wildly swing, it should oscillate between, say, 80% and 120%. If you're at the bottom of a recession, 80% is okay. If you're at the top of financial market, 80% is unhealthy. There's a lot of things that cause the pension crisis. I'm not going to get into all these, but I am going to say your city has paid the bill. I know I said this already, but I'm going to reinforce it. Your city has paid the bill. They have not shorted the pension fund. They get the bill, they pay it. Every employee that works in this city has paid their contribution. I want to kind of re-emphasize that it's not the employee's fault. Because think of all of you when you take a job. If you went to a job and they offered you more than you were expecting, are you going to say no? Whatever the benefit package is, you compare that to the other places you're looking at, and you choose the place that you want to work that provides competitive salary and benefits. And that's what your employees did. There's a tendency in these, and I'm a little protective because I am a former employee and I am a retiree. There is a tendency to point the finger at the employees because it's their debt. It's not their debt, it's their benefit for the service they've already performed. So I just want to keep that kind of front and center. Now, whose fault is it? The people who didn't realize that they were accumulating debt for years and they could have accelerated their debt payments. And we're going to talk about that. And I'm not pointing at the 2 in the back because they're relatively new, but it's the city councils and the city administration over the years that haven't managed the debt of the pension plan. This city council has recognized there's an issue and they're taking steps to educate on what the issue is and find a solution. But it took decades to get into this problem. You can't accumulate debt for 19 years and expect to get rid of it in 2. It's going to take searching for solutions, it's going to take some fortitude, and it's going to take a commitment and discipline to pay down the debt and get back on track. There is no magic bullet. I'm not going to end this by saying you can fix this by doing this, because it's not that simple. I kind of covered this. Markets are strong, but our pension funds aren't. That's a reminder of the pension or the fiscal markets. But let's talk about what's happening here. Every year, CalPERS publishes valuation reports. There's 4 of them that go out for the city. One for the public safety classic employees, public safety pepper employees, non-public safety classic employees, non-public safety pepper employees. 4 different plans. In those valuation reports, they tell you everything you need to know and a whole bunch you don't about the pension plan. You can search for them online on CalPERS, or you can just go to the city's website, because your city is one of the few cities that puts all their documents online for you to see. Inside the valuation reports, they are literally dozens of pages long, and there's a lot of information in them, but there's only a couple of pages that are really instructive. The one that starts off with required employer contributions, and the one that starts off with plan funded status, that will tell you a picture of the health of the plan and what it's going to take to continue to pay the plan. There's a third page that, if you're kind of a numbers geek, you may want to look at, and that's the amortization and debt payment schedule on what it's going to take to get out of debt. We are going to talk about that today, but not in the detail that's in the report. So this is where you are right now. Now remember, I said you had 4 plans. And I don't think this has a laser pointer, does it? No. It says 4 plans. So this is your unfunded liability and your funded status in each of those 4 plans. In total, $16.6 million of unfunded liability. Now, unfunded liability does not mean if everybody retires today, what it costs you. What it means is that at this point in time, you're $16.6 million short of what you would need to have in the bank today, that together with the future contributions of normal costs and the returns in the market would provide for the retirement that's due when it's due. So you have to have the money now, and you have to continue to pay your normal costs, and you have to continue to earn money in plan. Now the other little asterisk on this is these numbers are only accurate if CalPERS hits every one of its assumptions every time going forward. Now that's impossible to do, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Is it related to that, sir?
Well, does this assume that we're going to get 7.5% returns over the next few years?
7%, yes.
7%.
So, and we're going to talk about what happens when that doesn't happen. We're going to get there. Sorry, there's a lot of dense information. So this is just taking kind of a historical look in pictures of how has the debt accumulated since 2011 to 2018. And the reason these numbers say 2018, I meant to mention this earlier, is when there's a lag in reporting and implementation. So when the city gets a valuation report like they just got, it's dated July or August, somewhere around now. The report that's dated now is a snapshot as of June 30th, 2018. So it's looking a year back. And it informs what the rates are going to be July 1st of next year. So you look a year back and you pay a year forward. So you always have this gap in time. So there's a 2-year gap. So while you see information here from 2018, it seems old, that's the most current information we have because of the way the system is. So this is what your non-public safety plan looks like. The horizontal-ish line is the funded status. So you can see that even though payments are going up, the funded status is going down. Part of this is due to that negative amortization that I talked to you about. The public safety plan is similar, just different magnitude. But here's the issue. When the contribution rates go up, that means the money's got to come out of the budget. The budget is like a pie. You have a bunch of slices of the pie. One of those slices goes to pensions. And your pension has an appetite like me. That slice gets a little bit bigger each time they show up at Thanksgiving dinner. And that leaves the slices for the other services to be a little bit slimmer. That's why my kids are skinny and I'm not. But, you know, the way I solve that at my house is I go to Costco and buy a bigger pie. You can't just quickly change the size of your pie in the city because government revenues grow at a slower rate than going to Costco and picking up a pie. But what happens? You got to pay more money in your budget, which means you're either going to decrease your services or increase your taxes or do a combination because you got to balance your budget. What happens if you just continually don't fund it? Then you start to imperil the retirement security of your employees, because it'll get to a point, you're not near there yet, but it'll get to a point where it's hard to recover from. Like when Arizona got into the 46, 47% funded ratio, it's very hard to recover when you have less than half the money you should have. So what happens? Crowd out of services. Crowd out means exactly what I was describing with the pie. One slice gets bigger, crowds out the pumpkin pie filling for the other folks. Inability to hire new employees, or constricted ability to hire new employees. It restricts your ability to raise wages. New tax and debt proposals are proposed because people are looking for money. If they believe it's a revenue problem, then they ask for more revenue to deal with it. You could get to some cities which achieve what's called a service level of insolvency. They're not close to bankruptcy, they have assets, they have cash flows, they're just not providing the level of service that their residents pay for and demand, because you start cutting back to a point where you can't efficiently provide services. You'll see cities that defer infrastructure maintenance, they stop mowing their lawns and their parks, they stop painting buildings, and things kind of build up over time. Then you get to bankruptcy. And we've seen in California a number of agencies go bankruptcy. Vallejo, Stockton, San Bernardino, the list goes on. In severe cases, and let me just emphasize, you are not a severe case. But if you ignore it, you will become a severe case. And in the severe cases, employees who become retirees end up getting less benefit. They work, they earned it, they were promised it, and they get less. When Detroit filed bankruptcy, their retirees initially took a 30% reduction in their pension. So you can imagine if you're retired, you're 80-something years old, and all of a sudden your pension's cut by 30%, you weren't expecting. Keep in mind, city employees aren't in Social Security, so they don't have that safety net. What they get from their defined benefit is their retirement. You can, now, Detroit mortgaged their art in the Detroit Museum of Art and used that money to prop up the pension system, and now employees only have I can't remember the exact amount, but a single digit, around a 5% give or take reduction in their pension. Cedar Falls, Rhode Island had a significant reduction in their pensions. Pritchard, Alabama, the retirees didn't know if there was a problem until one month the checks stopped coming, and they got a letter saying we're broke. Not a good place to be. They are paying retirees again, but they had to go months, I think over a year without payment. Loyalton, California here, Northern California, the city just couldn't afford to make their CalPERS payment. They're a very, very small city. They stopped paying. CalPERS said, okay, they only have, I think, 1 or 2 retirees. They said, okay, we're cutting their retirement. They cut their retirements by 60%. These are people that are already retired. So now what is the city doing? They're paying the delta out of their general fund, which is a very expensive way to do it. So, because instead of paying 25% investing over time, you're paying 100% of what you do right then. LA Works down here in Southern California was a joint powers authority through several different agencies. They hired employees, made benefit promises, and then people started pulling out of the JPA, stopped making their contributions. Employees had their retirements compromised because of that. Now we're getting into the scary stuff. Remember I told you that the debt needs to be paid off, and they amortize the debt. This is a graph depicting what your pension payments for only the unfunded liability. Not what's due for people earning their benefit, but your debt payments, your mortgage payments on the unfunded liability. This is the graph that I presented to the council a few weeks ago when I was here. And it basically shows that for the current fiscal year, what has been expended is $910,000 towards debt. In the year 2031, that was projected to go up to $1,765,016 debt payment. So you can see that the difference between those two is going to put some significant pressure on the city budget, because the money's got to come from somewhere. Yesterday, I received copies of the new valuation report. So I thought, well, I'm going to stay up late and I'm going to update the graphs. I think it's important for you to know, because remember, I just presented this to the council. But what I want to show you first, before I show you the new numbers, is what did CalPERS project 5 years earlier that these payments would be? Because as I've pointed out a couple times, CalPERS has been wrong. So CalPERS has been very wrong. In fact, these yellow stars, hopefully you can see them, these yellow stars are what CalPERS 5 years ago projected that your payments would be, and these bars are now what the payments they were asking for. They're about a third, they were a third less before. But CalPERS basically says, well, we're continuing to refine our numbers. You're in negative amortization, your employees are earning more benefits as they go to work because you're promising them. Now we owe this additional money. So then we get the new report. First I'll show it to you out of context because it looks kind of the same. You can see it went up a little bit, but the shape is about the same. But now what I'm going to do is overlay them on top of each other so you can see the difference between what I presented to the council a few weeks ago when I said, don't count on these numbers because they're not accurate and they will go up. I want to show you where they went up to. Oops, I forgot to show you the stars, trying to keep things consistent here. So, now these are the new projections. So the yellow part poking above is now what CalPERS is saying that your payments will be going forward. So let me just remind you where they said 5 years ago. Yellow stars are 5 years ago. Red bars are last year's valuation. I guess that's a yellowish color. I meant to make it orange. The orangish color up above is what they now say your payments are. So let's go back to 2031. They had projected the payment was going to be $1,765,016. And now they're projecting that payment is going to be $1,992,152. I didn't calculate the difference, but I can tell you it's a lot. It's $230,000 more projected for these payments. Okay. The question was, for those of you who may not have heard, why the steep drop off? So when you buy a home and you get a mortgage, it's what they call a level dollar mortgage. You get a mortgage payment, that payment remains the same over time. When CalPERS and pension funds amortize the debt, they're amortizing the debt based on what they assume is going to change between now and the end of the payment period. And they're sort of middle weighted. And it's the way they calculate it, because right now you're in negative amortization. So as you're paying, you're accruing a little bit of new debt from your employees' service that you're providing each year, plus you're taking the debt that you didn't pay last year and you're adding that on top of the interest debt. And then it gets to a point where you get to positive amortization and then you make an impact. So this is kind of how they've laid it out in their amortization program. In the valuation reports, they give you options for shorter amortization periods, and these charts change based on that. These are just CalPERS numbers taken out of a table and put into a graph, all the way in the back.
The year 2031, what kind of forecasting technique is being used?
It's the actuarial valuation process, which I'm glad you asked, because that slide's coming up. So, hold that.
Are they doing any type of Monte Carlo
So-
simulations?
Yes, I'm going to show you that.
Okay.
So, I just want to finish this point, and then we're going to get to that. It's in a couple of slides here. So, in 5 years, the debt payment that's going to be due in 5 years under the new valuation is going to be $686,000 more than your current debt payment. And in 10 years, your payment's going to be $939 more than you're paying in debt today. So, I do see some people taking pictures of the slides. We're going to give you this in PDF. We'll make it available for you, so don't worry if you don't get it. Yes, sir.
A couple of comments. First of all, I want to thank you very much for your service as a policeman in our city.
My pleasure.
I'd say we owe you a debt of gratitude, but that term debt is a little bit depressing. And secondly, for the granularity you provided tonight. But in your pursuing this analysis for us, and we appreciate the pro bono effort, has anything like this been done in the last 10 to 15 years as you've researched this type of analysis, so that I presume we wouldn't have been in this situation if we had, for instance, maybe moving from defined benefit to defined contribution, that might have helped along with a few other things. But Is this the first time that the city council has really looked at this with this type of granularity?
I believe this is the first time your city council has done this. I've given this presentation to other city councils.
Yeah, I'm talking about our city.
This is, I believe, the first time.
So for all the negotiations and all the deliberations and all the union, all the contracts we've had, we really haven't pursued anything in terms of potential costs.
I can't give you a direct answer. All I can say is what I've done, this is the first time.
That's very helpful.
So that'll be an important question for some city staff. And let me just reemphasize what I said at the beginning. I didn't do any analysis. I just took their numbers and put them in pictures so they're easier for you to understand and giving the explanation. Because if I just gave you the actuarial evaluation reports, it wouldn't make much sense. So let me get through a few things. So why do these projections change? And this leads into what the gentleman in the back asked. There is an actuarial valuation process. And an actuary has to make assumptions about a number of things. They have to make assumptions, which I alluded to earlier. How long is somebody going to work? Are they going to retire at 25 years, 26 years, 28 years, 32 years? How long are they going to be in service? Because how long they're going to be in service helps determine how long they're going to be out of service and retirement. They look at what age they were actually hired. They do an actuarial calculation down to the participant level. But they have to make assumptions. They know what age they were when they were hired. They know how much money they make now, but they have to make assumptions on how many people are married, how many people are going to get married, how many people are going to get divorced and their spouse get half, how much inflation is going to be during this period of time, which is a long period of time, what our salary growth going to be, not just the salary that employees get, not whether they make $50,000 and get a raise for $55,000, but how much is total salary for the city going to be? Are they going to add employees or subtract employees? Because that changes the total volume of salary you have. They're going to look at interest rates. They're going to look at inflation. They're going to look at disability rates. They're going to look at retirement rates. They're going to look at mortality. What age do we expect people to live? And that's getting longer each year. That's great for us as individuals. It's not good for our pension plans. And then they look at the investment rate of return and the discount rate. So this gets directly to your question. There's two processes that happen kind of in sequence. It's almost like a dog chasing its tail. The actuary helps determine what things are going to cost. The investment consultant tries to figure out how much money they can get in the market. The investment advisors tell them what assumed rate of return they're planning to use. They calculate it. That informs them on whether they're going to change their investment rate of return, and it kind of goes like that. So the investment consultant runs Monte Carlo simulations. They do all kinds of different things, and they determine the likelihood of achieving that result in the future. And what that informs is their asset allocation. How are they going to invest this money over time to get to the investment rate of return that's being used to calculate your liabilities? Because remember I said earlier, they have to take all this into account to figure out when someone's going to retire, to figure out how much they have to pay them, and then they have to think about how long they're going to live, and how long their surviving spouse is going to live, so that they can calculate what the total cost is, and then they have to discount it back to today's rate to determine how much money they should have in the bank today. There's a lot of places for wrong assumptions to be used. Actuaries are the only ones that have a worse track record than weathermen. As a weatherman, it's usually pretty binary. It's going to rain or it's not. So, but the actuaries will make one guarantee on their assumptions, and that is the assumption that the assumptions will be wrong. They know for a fact that every one of these assumptions is going to be wrong because it's almost impossible to pinpoint any of them. The question is, what's the magnitude? Are they using the right mortality tables? Are they looking at just past performance, or are they looking at future markets when they're determining what their rate of return is going to be? Are they discounting appropriately for the risk that's inherent in the plan? Are they guessing whether the city's going to give raises or increase the number of employees? They're guessing on inflation. Does anyone here know what inflation is going to be next year? They have to guess. So it's not a science. It's an art at best.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's also my understanding at the CalPERS level that they froze, they stopped counting new employees, that all these calculations are done on existing obligations only, not on,
No, that's not accurate.
that's not accurate, okay.
In fact, if you look at.
That was in the Stanford study.
If you look at well, what they may have said is because of PEPRA, the valuations for the classic employees don't count new employees because there aren't going to be new employees in that plan. They're on a separate valuation.
Okay.
So it could be true in one instance, but it's not broadly true.
Okay.
And I'd have to look at that to see where you're referring to.
They've shifted the cost to the employee.
So the PEPRA plan shifted the normal costs,
Yeah.
split higher to the employee, but not the unfunded liability. So we're almost done. Sorry, I know this is long, we're almost done. CalPERS knows that they need to change their assumptions. In fact, I'm gonna put up here on this slide and another slide, here you can see their chief investment officer saying that they're not gonna get the returns that they're gonna get in the future. They have their professional investment people telling them that, the CEO of the pension system. Here is the, I don't know who said that here, I can't read, Pensions and Investments magazine, Pensions and Investments, even one of their own CalPERS board members saying the reality is somewhere between 6 and 6 1/4, but we keep assuming 7. So it's kind of a eyes wide open process. So is it a revenue problem? Many people have said this is a revenue problem. Just simply don't have the money to pay the bill. I challenge that, and I'm going to challenge, I've already challenged your elected leaders, I've challenged the employees and retirees today, I'm challenging you to ask yourself, is it a revenue problem or is it a debt management problem? Everybody in California is facing this. In 2018, there were 352 local tax increases on the ballots between June and November. It was a very rare situation when any of the people proposing the taxes said that it was pension related. In order to get these things passed, there were a lot of promises made to voters. I can tell you that very few have used the money to pay down pension debt. In my city of Roseville, where I live, they pay $19 million a year in interest. $19 million a year in interest? They could pay off your entire debt in 1 year of interest. They passed a revenue measure, a sales tax that generates $18.5 million a year in revenue, and they're only putting $900,000 towards pension. The rest they're putting towards other services, so they're not attacking the problem. If you look historically at your revenue growth versus your pension debt growth, revenue's in green because it's money, that is growing slowly. There's a little bit of a spike because you did have a revenue measure, but your pension debt is growing as well. The trend lines tell us that they're going to cross again, and that was done before we looked at the new numbers. To pay this off on the schedule you are on, which is 25 years, it's going to take $15.7 million in interest. Shouldn't surprise you because you've all bought homes. Mortgages are expensive. So this is a look at what happens to that debt. This is CalPERS calculations. If they exceed their expectations and return 8% in the market, if they use that discount rate, your liability is only $10 million. But if it's 6, like some of their investment experts are telling them, it's $24 million. If you're a pessimist like Stanford, where they advocate for a risk-free rate of return as the only appropriate one, then it's about $52 million. It doesn't matter which one you pick, there's debt in all of them. And that debt is a debt that's due. It doesn't matter how pensions change, it doesn't matter if your state changes, that debt you guys own. It's just as if you had taken out a loan to build a building. You're not alone, I told you this before. Almost every government agency in California and across the nation, I know I showed you some national examples, but in California, the state controller's office that tracks this using the government's reported numbers says the problem is $400 billion in the state. Stanford, someone mentioned Stanford, Joe Nation, a former Democrat assembly member, who's best known for, he was the author of AB 32, the environmental laws. He is a professor now at Stanford University. He estimates the debt to be $1 trillion in the state of California. In reality, it's probably somewhere in between, but it's a big number. I think I've covered this, but I know I've said it before, but this is at the top of the financial market. We've been approaching the top of a financial market for quite some time. This is the longest economic expansion in U.S. markets. We're hitting new highs all the time. I remember when I was on the council in San Jose, one of our council members, at that time the Dow was at 8,000, and one of the council members says, well, we don't have to worry about it, because when the Dow hits 12,000, this problem will go away. Well, the Dow hit 12, 14, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, and the problem is bigger than it was then. So, what can we do? This is what you're all here for. What can we do? There's really only three main buckets of reform. You can change the benefit, and when I say you, it's the capital you, State of California. They did that with the PEPRA plan. There's no plans to do that currently at the state level. You can change the governance, which changes the decision making. It's very unlikely that that's going to happen at the state level right now. There are efforts, there are people talking about a state solution. When I talk to your employees today and your employee unions, they were asking, why is there not a state solution? The problem is the political climate is not right, number one. There's still people in denial, number two, but most importantly, there's 4 cases pending before the California Supreme Court that it wouldn't make any sense to try and do a state fix until we see what the Supreme Court says is allowable and not. So those 4 cases are working their way up. It's Marin County, Alameda County, Costa County, and a group called LA Judges. They're all working their way up through the courts. The third is really the only one that you have at your disposal, and that is how the city manages its debt, how they're going to fund the debt and fund the budget, what they're going to do with their revenue, what they're going to do with their normal cost contributions, and what they're going to do with the debt payment. So because you have, hang on one second, you have multiple problems. You have the 16, well actually a little bit less, but around 16 million in debt for the classic employees. That's a large number that needs to be paid off. You have a smaller amount of debt for the PEPRA employees. It's a very small amount that, quite frankly, I think you should manage now before it gets to a big problem. Then you have an issue with the calculation of the normal cost that we know has been wrong. So the city might want to look at how they calculate what risk they're comfortable with and start reserving money for the debt that they know is being accumulated each year. And then look at the big debt and say, what can we do? Because we're paying a lot of interest, we're negative amortization, how are we going to manage that debt? It's no different than anybody who's listened to, who's that, Dave Ramsey? You got a bunch of debt, you look at it, you come up with a plan, you manage the debt, you aggressively attack your debt, there's ways to do it. But you have to look at it, what's contributing to your debt? Negative amortization, interest, new debt being accumulated. So you got to take the bite-sized chunks and figure out what you can do. And that's what these meetings are about. We're not here to say, this is how you fix it. I've had at least a dozen people ask me today, how are you going to tell us to fix it? And I just say, this is not my problem to fix. It's all of your stakeholders to fix. And this is where the best solutions are going to come if people like you, people like the union leadership, people, the employees, the retirees come together, participate in the ad hoc committees, meetings that are coming up, give your input to those 2 people in the back, give your input to me. I'm going to put my contact information up there. Start offering some ideas. Some of them are not going to work, but we won't know unless you tell us when we look at it. My job is to help you determine the impact of these potential solutions. There are other people, there are lawyers, there are think tanks that we work with that can analyze things for us and do a much better job than I can do in figuring out what the impacts will do. We'll reach out to them to get some assistance in doing this. But if we want a true solution, I think it needs to be like the Arizona model where people get together, they talk about it. We figure things out, we kind of come up with a menu of solutions. Let's identify, I think I've identified the problems for you, but let's confirm that that's what we see the problems are. Let's figure out how we're going to approach each of these problems, come up with ideas, and hopefully get buy-in from people to start addressing the problem. Sir, all the way in the back, nice and loud for me.
Yeah, I think when you addressed the contract, so to say, that the employees have the 4 different classes of employees, and you stated about the 2% at 25 years, so it was a very simplified version of what happens. Would you or the government, the city council, publish what the actual thing is, the contract for each of the group of employees, and show how they can spike their retirement to be more than their highest 1 year? Because there's a lot of ways of doing that.
So,
What policies the city has in place to prevent the different classes of employees, including management, of doing that sort of thing?
so first of all, the description of each of the plan's benefits in detail are in the valuation reports. They're posted on the city's website. What I gave is a summary of that, you're correct, but there are other provisions and they're explicitly outlined in those reports, and they're all public. We might be able to work to get them all in one document to make it easy. I'll work with the ad hoc committee to work on that. Let me address pension spiking. Pension spiking, as commonly referred to, does not exist in the city of Palos Verdes Estates. Pension spiking is usually, the ones that we hear about, are when somebody works a lot of overtime in their last year or their calculation period. No overtime in Palos Verdes Estate is pensionable. So someone can work that, but it doesn't affect their pension contribution. If somebody worked here, say for 25 years, and was a planner, working in the planning department, and they got a job in another agency, being the planning director of a planning agency, CalPERS treats all public employment as part of your final average compensation. So if they worked there for 3 years at a much higher salary, that would impact the pension that Palos Verdes Estates does. But that California PEPRA law, the one that I referred to, in addition to restricting spiking for people on the PEPRA plan, eliminated most pension spiking opportunities in all plans. And in fact, that was recently litigated at the Supreme Court in the CAL FIRE versus CalPERS case, and the Supreme Court said that PEPRA prevails and that spiking is not allowed. That was an airtime issue, which is sometimes used for spiking as well. Now, for the people who work for the city in the back, did I characterize that properly as far as where you guys are on spiking? Only pensionable pay and identified special pays are pensionable. Base pay, is that correct? I see some heads nodding in the back. So, but we will get those summaries of the plan provisions and get them all in one spot for you. I have someone taking notes up here, so you're not relying on my faulty memory, but we are going to get that for you. Yes, sir.
When was the last time that CalPERS actually returned 7% of the money that they invested?
Well, it depends how you look at that number, because on a market basis, they have done it. I had one slide where you saw the returns, but on a cumulative basis, from an actuarial standpoint, they have not. I didn't read this report I got yesterday in detail, but I don't believe they hit their actuarial mark there yet. I think I got a couple more slides, so hold those last couple of things so I can just knock out these.
On this slide.
Oh, okay.
Just a question. Should we understand that plan design, does the city have any discretion, or within those different categories is it fixed by CalPERS?
Plan design and plan governance are state legislation and CalPERS. So I already said this verbally, because I know my slides, and this is the 6th time I'm giving this presentation today. But the best solutions are collaborative solutions, getting everyone together, talking about it, bringing up ideas, figuring out how we're going to approach it, looking at everything. You have to look at it, you have to look at the cost, you have to look at the risks. There's opportunity costs, sometimes you have to look at all that so that you can come up with both short-term and long-term, by the way, so you can come up with what will work. You have to look at your budget because it's going to take revenue to fix it. You've got to pay your debt. It's your debt. There's no way out of that. So how you do that is going to be the big question. And no matter how efficient you are, you can always figure out ways to be more efficient. So you want to look at everything critically. Now I'm at the end of my slides. I'll leave this up so anyone who wants to write it down, I got you, I'm gonna call on you in a second. And we are going to make this presentation available, and now I'm gonna go into questions. Yes, sir? Can someone grab me a water?
The pension calculation formula, 2%, there was a 2.5% in there, times your salary, times the number of years. Is that 2% locked in stone somehow? Because if you had that and you worked 50 years, you're gonna get 100% of your salary when you retire.
So the question was on the formula that I showed you, the benefit multiplier, the years of service, and the final average salary, are they fixed in stone? So the 2%, yes, is fixed in stone, or the 2.7, but the years of service is capped at 30. So you can work 35 years, but only the 30 counts in your calculation. Does that make sense? But the percentage works across the board.
Have you looked at the federal formula, which is like 1% times the years of service times your salary?
Yeah, the question is, have we looked at the federal? We have actually, as an organization, we've looked at all the states and the federal. Those are all things that, quite frankly, need to be advocated at the state level. We're not saying that we're not advocating there, but that's an issue that has to be handled at the state, not here at the local level. You don't have the ability to make those changes and promises. You're stuck. I've got a few more people. Any other thing?
So is this 2%?
It's
Who manages that? Who sets that?
he asked who sets the formulas. CalPERS does. I'm gonna go to the back of the room.
Well, you just actually brought up my point.
Okay.
I mean, the 6% rate of return is ridiculous. Isn't CalPERS in the state shackling itself in what it can invest in?
Yes. So the question, if you didn't hear it, is the rate of return is not reasonable, and isn't the state of California, i.e. CalPERS, restricting what they can invest in? The answer is yes, and let me explain that. The CalPERS Board of Trustees, they determine almost everything we just talked about. State law sets the parameters of the pension plan, and then it's given to CalPERS to administer. They have a board of directors that makes the decisions on all those actuarial numbers, how they're going to invest. But you are exactly right. The CalPERS board has decided there's certain things that for social reasons they have chosen not to invest in, so they have restricted their investment choices, and there have been studies, not by me, but by other people, that have calculated how much that has cost the plan.
Well, that's
Okay, hang on, we got to finish up.
Okay, didn't in Arizona, where I believe you told the unions that that was about the most successful project that you had, didn't you go with their statewide fire unions and other unions to the legislature and fix it from the top down?
The question was, if you didn't hear it, is didn't that system get fixed from the top down? Everything is correct except for the order. The firefighters union and the police union started with the state legislature, who then brought in us and the other stakeholders to work on it. But yes, it was a top-down state reform.
Okay.
Which I agree with you needs to be done in California.
And there's certain things about pensions that I think people need to know. I think they need to know that when the benefit packages get so bad compared to other agencies, and around here, I mean, you have high-paying agencies like the Santa Monica's and the Beverly Hills. If employees were to lateral to those, say they, wages became stagnant, and those employees were to lateral to places where they could be making, say, 20% more, wouldn't the city then be also bearing the additional contribution in PERS? And it leads to a conundrum that this is something that has to be fixed from the top down. The employees, I don't see as the solution, because if you diminish what they have, they can go elsewhere, and then the city's unfunded liability will go up and increase.
I agree with everything you said, except nobody said the employees are the solution. So what I said, just to be clear.
There's a concern that...
So hang on, you had your chance, let me clarify that. What I've said here I think was pretty clear. There's some things that are out of your control, and there's some things that are in your control. You have a debt that even if the state fixes the issues that many people have with the system, the debt is already accrued and owned. That debt is what I've been talking about, is how are you going to manage that debt? You can do nothing and wait for the state to fix it. And that may be the choice that comes out at the end of this, but that budget pressure that happens over the next 5 and 10 years will come out of the general fund, which will come out of services that are being delivered. So you're going to pay the debt one way or another. The question is, are you going to let the debt manage you, or are you going to manage the debt? And that doesn't mean just write a check and pay it off. Nobody said here to change the employees' benefits. That's been done in 2012. No one here said we're asking the employees to change anything. That may be an assumption that some people have made, but that is not anything that you've heard me or the ad hoc committee talk about. So over here.
How is your organization funded?
So we're a nonprofit organization that is funded like most nonprofits through donations. We apply for family foundation grants. We partner with other agencies or other nonprofits, and we get donors. So
the work you've done with these other plans, has that been on a consultancy basis that's paid for by?
No, we don't.
Or it's just all based on donations?
We don't accept anything other than donations. So we don't take money from government agencies. We file, like all nonprofits, a 990 form that shows our donors. The donors change sometimes when we're working on stuff. Like I mentioned, we had worked on some of the, I don't remember if I mentioned it to you, but I've mentioned it today. We worked on some of the CAL FIRE legal briefs when that was going in front of the Supreme Court. We had donors throughout California who had interest in that and donated to us, and we helped fund the legal research and the filing of the briefs. We have the family foundations. I'm always applying for these. I just got a very large check from Southern California folks who are helping us with some issues, so more south than this. So we have a bunch of things like that we do, but we're a nonprofit, just like a lot of other nonprofits out there. Yes, thank you.
Has anybody considered making each individual homeowner or landowner in our city responsible for their portion of the debt as of today, or maybe next January 1st, and it would be financed for that homeowner, or that homeowner could pay it off at that moment, and there would be nothing that they would be responsible for it. If they were to not pay it off at that moment, it would be financed by a financial organization, the best of which would be found.
So the quick answer is no, that has not been done, but it is surely one of the options that we can put on the list to look at. So,
I think that would be something we should look at.
so I heard Katie furiously typing, so she's writing down everything what everybody, typing down everything what everyone has said. I'm going to go to some people I haven't heard yet, so I'm going to go to this lady and then the gentleman in the reddish shirt. Yes?
Okay. Recently, the city of Redondo Beach was going to go from their own private fire department to the county fire department, and then they took it off the table. Let's say they did it. They went from their own private employees to the county service. Would they be responsible for the debt for the people that were leaving their city?
So the question, in case you all heard it, is if a city outsources the fire department, like Redondo Beach was looking at for their fire service, what happens with the debt for the current employees? So the debt that has been incurred for up to date remains with Palos Verdes Estates.
With Redondo Beach.
Or Redondo Beach, I'm sorry.
Stays within the city.
I get it. It stays with their employing agency is what I should say. So that debt is already accumulated for their service. Now, keep in mind, when you outsource, the people who come in have benefits too. So the other agency's not going to pay any new accruals for you. So you start to become responsible for new employees in a different manner. You're just paying for it in a different stream. But your obligations don't go away. Sir, in the red.
You mentioned Arizona several times. In general, can you tell us what they did that was good?
Their process, number one, and that's what we're trying to emulate here. Arizona had some very unique problems. One, they had a cost of living structure that was literally robbing the pension system. Instead of having a cost of living adjustment that was tied to CPI or pre-funded as part of their valuation process, they had a situation where if the plan earned more than the assumed rate of return, all excess above a certain threshold went into a side fund. And that side fund was invested along with the regular assets, and then that side fund paid out the cost of living increases. The problem is they deemed that excess returns. So anytime the plan had excess returns. However, the way it was implemented, when the plan had debt, the excess reserves were siphoned off first before the debt was paid off. So the plan could lose 10% one year and make 11% the next year, and they'd skim off some of the 11 to put in the side fund instead of replenishing what was lost. So the plan continued to drop in funded status, while the other fund, while it was going from 100% funded to 47% funded, it paid out 4% cost of living adjustments for 20 years to retirees. And then it wasn't until that fund completely drained, and there was no prospect of refilling it, that people got serious about doing reform. So that had to be fixed. That was a critical fix. Retirement ages changed. Governance of the boards completely changed. There is Reason Foundation, that's who I was with when that project started, on their website, which is reason.org. They have a detailed analysis of what happened in that. So instead of me trying to remember, I've been doing presentations since 8 a.m. I won't remember all the details, but it will be in that. And if you want, I can get a bullet point summary put together for you, but it'd be easier if you just went to the website.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, in the shirt.
We know that we've got a $16.8 million debt, so we know we have that today. Have you seen or have you been given the granularity that you need so that we can see what the annual shortfall in either revenue or the additional expenses that we've got on a going forward basis are, so that the council can take a look at upcoming budgets, obviously given the number of variables and all the other kind of stuff. But is it $1 million a year, $2 million a year, in order to get back to, let's say, a reasonable level of debt that we need to be at?
So we haven't done that yet, but that is one of the steps. So keep in mind, in addition to this ad hoc committee, there's the financial advisory committee that does a lot of the financial stuff. They will inform each other. The city hasn't even had time to fully digest the new report and the increased cost, but that will feed into budget projections. So we will get there, but this is really, today is the first step of everything. So we haven't, what you see is what we've done.
Do you have a milestone in place? Do you have an idea of a timeline?
We have some meetings set up. Have those been finalized yet, the meeting dates? We will get out, they've been collecting people's names and addresses or email addresses. There'll be communication that comes out from the city. There will be more meetings. There will be an opportunity to provide input directly to the ad hoc members, directly to me, to the city manager. All of that will kind of funnel back. I should have pointed out that the city manager's here. I'm sure everyone knows her, Carolyn Wade. I saw you earlier and I was going to do it and I forgot. There will be opportunities to give input and for us to do things. If you want to be sort of a more active person, make a note next to your name so they know to get to you that this is something you're really interested in, because they are looking for engagement. Sir, in the greenish right there, yes.
Given that this public employees...
Can we turn the lights back on so I can see a little better?
Pardon?
That's what I asked you. Can you turn the lights on real quick? I'm just having trouble seeing colors. Thanks.
Yes, it's green. Given that this whole public employees' retirement appears to be a nationwide fiasco compared to the private industry, which there's certain specific problems there, but not a nationwide fiasco, why does the public sector continue to perpetuate basically these retirement plans that are seen nowhere except in the public sector.
So, that's a big question. But let me say this. The private sector experienced similar crisis a few decades ago. The difference is, private companies go bankrupt when this happened, governments don't.
They just charge the taxpayer.
So, when the private sector pension plans had this issue, the federal government stepped in and created a law called ERISA. And that ERISA law prescribes how pension plans report their data, what they must do if they become endangered or threatened in a critical state. They prescribe actions that must be taken and prohibit other actions from being taken. Almost every one of those things to the letter are not allowed to happen in public pension plans. There's a different set of laws, case law. The courts have made a difference. I can't tell you why, but there is a distinctly different case. Sometime in the future, we may see something like that at the federal level. Right now, that doesn't exist. All the way in the back.
Yeah, I've been all the way through.
Can you talk louder?
Yes. I've been through these CalPERS statements back and forth, up and down, working with Eli, who's on the Financial Advisory Committee. I can't find the fees anywhere, the transaction and the administrative fees. And yet, the numbers that you were showing about the results, they say that those are grosser fees. So it's really lower once you put them in. Do you know what the fees are we pay on CalPERS for transaction and admin?
I can't answer that, but CalPERS has reports. They're not in the valuation reports. They have other reports that go to the board on that. But I can't give you that answer now. Yes, sir.
If CalPERS is doing such a lousy job of investing money, I've got funds earning 20–30% this year. Let Vanguard run the California pension system. Who does CalPERS answer to? Who
The governor and the two chambers of the legislature.
I can't hear that.
The governor and the two chambers of the legislature, but most importantly, the state constitution. There's a Pension Protection Act, I believe it was of 1996, that's enshrined in the Constitution that gives pension boards their authority to do what they do. And that was something granted by the voters.
On his point, CalPERS has a 6% or 7% that they think that they can make, but they're not meeting target. But I think most of the people there have retirement accounts, investment accounts, and stock and thing. Can a city have a bond issue and put that money aside to invest on our own with a group of people?
So the question is, can you bond against your debt and invest the debt to get out of the problem?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is there are what they call POBs, pension obligation bonds, and there are agencies that do that. There are some complicating factors that I want to get into the details, but because of Palos Verdes Estate's size, they're in what's called a pooled plan. So you're combined with other small cities. So some of the debt is solely yours and some is pooled with other people, so you have to be real careful. The question I'm not sure of the answer is, can a city issue a pension obligation bond and put it into a separate trust mechanism to fund the pension? I'd have to ask because I don't know. So we're recording it. Now, but I will tell you this. There's been a number of analyses nationwide of pension obligation bonds, and the success rate is very low because essentially what you're doing is you're creating a game of arbitrage. Can I make more than I pay on my bonds? It has not been very successful. Boston College Center for Retirement Research has done 2 papers on that. One where they found no winners, and then they updated it recently where they show some examples of where it works. But essentially you're timing the market. If you were to issue pension obligation bonds today and invest the money and the recession starts tomorrow, you'd be worse off. If you bought pension obligation bonds and invested it all in the Dow when it was at the bottom, you'd be very well off. So you have to ask yourself, can I time the market and can I beat the arbitrage system? Those are two very difficult things to do. And let me just say, CalPERS is the largest pension fund in the nation. They have some of the best people advising them, and they cannot time the market. I'll leave it at that. All the way, the person in front of you first, who's got their hand up, and then you. Yes, who had their hand up in the back in front of you? Yes, you.
You said that our liability aside, you said that ideally, we really need a state solution. My question just is our legislature covered by CalPERS and all of these public rules? So how can we expect them to fix it if they benefit because there's no cost to them?
Good question. No, the state legislature is not in the system. There are some old legislators that are in the system. My understanding is just the 6 constitutional officers that are in defined benefit systems. The legislators themselves are in defined contribution plans. Their staff and all the professional staff for the state are in CalPERS, but the elected officials are not. Sir?
Can you say a little bit more about...
Oh, wait, hang on, let me get this question, then I'll come back to you.
Can you say a little bit more about the 4 cases that are the California Supreme Court? One, are they going to be merged and adjudicated with one ruling or multiple rulings? And 2, who will those rulings affect? Will they affect CalPERS, or will they affect local governments, or both?
So let me answer the last question first. What the Supreme Court rules will affect not only all CalPERS agencies, but probably all pension systems in the state. Depends on which the rulings are, because some of them are universal, like the 1955 case was very broad. Public pension benefits are. The one for CAL FIRE was specifically the PEPRA law is, so they were very prescriptive. So it depends. The Supreme Court could have answered a lot of questions by being very broad in what they ruled on in the CAL FIRE case. They chose not to. They took a very narrow ruling. The first question. Second, I can't remember them all, so I will get that to you. Someone else asked me for that earlier today, but we will get a short synopsis of the cases pending before the Supreme Court. I think some of them have been briefed, some of them haven't. And the reason I get confused, I'm following cases in multiple states at the same time. So, this gentleman in the red, then I'm going to come all the way up to you next, because I know you had your hand up, but I keep dominating the back.
I had a follow-up on your bond question.
Yes.
We're probably in the lowest interest rate in human history now. And corporations now, AAA corporations can sell bonds, 30-year fixed with 3%. Why couldn't the city of PDE sell $16 million in municipal bonds, pay off its debt, and then retire the bonds over time as part of the budget?
You could. That's one option. The question is, if you did that and we had a 2-year recession, the early losses might not be able to be recovered. So that just takes some analysis on what the risks are related. That is, bonding the debt is one of the things. It can be bonded against the pension, it can be bonded against a revenue stream. There's a lot of different things that can happen. Yes, sir.
So I understand there's a very large penalty to get out of CalPERS, but putting that aside, with all the existing employees and past employees, do we have the degree of freedom to set up a defined contribution system for new employees?
Not at this time. The question was, do you have the ability to set up a new system for new employees? At this time, no. The Supreme Court cases may change that. So that's why I said some of this is pending to see what happens. It all depends how the Supreme Court rules, if they're narrow rulings, if they're broad rulings. That may be a possibility, we don't know. There is also the possibility that you could have a state solution that says that, or you could have a ballot measure that says that. There's possibilities, but right now the answer is no.
So there are 2 parts of that. One is a different plan for new employees. The second is a defined contribution. Are both being tested in these cases?
So you already have a new plan for new employees, and it's the PEPRA plan.
Right.
So it's a less generous plan that costs less, and right now has very little debt, but it does have debt. So they did that in 2012, 13, whenever that happened. There are no plans to create a new CalPERS pension plan But right now, as a CalPERS agency, based on the CalPERS rules and the state of the current laws in California and the current case law, you cannot really offer anything else to your employees. You're kind of locked in right now. That may change. It may change by court case, it may change by state legislation, it may change by voter initiative, or it could change, CalPERS could change. There are ways that it can be changed, but right now the answer is no.
Just a quick question. Can't the city contract for any and all services? So for example, let's take engineering. Convenience states with contract for engineering. So we don't pay any pension costs, we just pay the engineering company. Couldn't we do the same thing for almost every service?
So, two things. All the talking, I'm having trouble hearing, so let's minimize the talking. The question was, can the city contract out for services? The answer is yes, they can, but that's something that has to be negotiated with employees. There's state laws surrounding how you outsource, and it's something that has to be dealt with, but that is something the city can do. Keep in mind though, if you outsource, that doesn't change your current debt. The debt still remains. But it is an option. It's one of those options for the budget.
One other question. Have you done the calculation of how much our debt is at the rate that PERS is getting, say 4.5%? In other words, it's not $16 million, it's something much higher, it's on 4.5.
So we haven't done any independent analysis yet. We'll probably partner with some organizations to do that. So all we have is what's in the valuation that shows what if it's at 8 or what if it's at 6. The young lady next to you.
You mentioned a moment ago, just responding to somebody's question, who does CalPERS answer to? You mentioned, I believe, 4 individuals. If I'm not mistaken, then CalPERS is allowed to use 6% or 7% indefinitely unless those individuals make some changes. Is that what I'm saying? What I'm hearing, even though they've got 15 years of miscalculation?
The status quo right now is the CalPERS Pension Board is the sole fiduciary decision maker for the pension plan, and that's outlined in our state constitution and the Pension Protection Act of 1996. Now, I'm trying to remember the exact wording, but it is very clear that they are the decision makers. So, the only thing that could change that is a constitutional amendment. There might be some constraints that the state can put, but it's very limited because they have very broad authority.
Aside from the Constitution, aren't they accountable to anyone?
They're accountable to their members,
and the members are happy with this?
A lot of the members don't know. I will be honest with you, a lot of the employees today, I think, had their eyes open. They didn't realize the status, and that's one of the reasons we're doing what we're doing, to talk and make sure everybody understands. Because I do think that it is a responsibility of cities and employees to put some pressure on CalPERS to do the right thing. I think we only have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Yes, sir.
So, you're right. The debt that we have is a debt that we have, and we have to figure out how to deal with that. But the question is, the ad hoc committee then going to also look at alternatives going forward? You mentioned a defined contribution plan, you mentioned outsourcing. Are we going to look at a way to get out of this mess that is PERS?
I think that, I'm confident saying that the ad hoc committee, the other ad hoc committee, the financial advisory committee, and the city council are going to look at all potential options, some of which they will have the ability to fully vet, and some they'll be restricted because of laws that don't allow them to. But our goal is to get as many ideas on the table so that everything can be looked at, so we can figure out what the solution is.
Yeah, and you're going to communicate that to us how, when you get all these options put together?
Rick, did you want to ask a question quickly, and then we'll wrap up?
All right, we're going to have him ask a question, and then they're going to kind of explain how we go forward. Right? Go ahead, nice and loud.
So, okay, given all these, constraints on cities of our size in solving a huge problem, what have other cities in California done that are our size, not San Jose's size, to really attack this problem?
Very few have done anything. Most of them are waiting to see what happens. and they're accumulating debt and feeling the budget pressure, and most are cutting services and/or raising taxes, some combination. And I think there's gonna be a lot of wake up when people read these new valuation reports that come out this year and next year. So, we said can I take yours offline so that we can wrap up? Let them wrap up the meeting, and then I'll stick around for a little bit, but I gotta figure out if I'm flying home or not.
Depends on whether you want to lie or not.
Yeah.
Right, so first let's please thank with us at 8 o'clock this morning with the first meeting, and where are we, 8:30 at night? Pete might be sick of us. But
Not to
thank
mention,
you.
I finished the PowerPoint, I emailed it to Karina at midnight last night.
Oh no, I'm sorry. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for being engaged and interested and asking good questions. I mean, even, a lot of way down in the weeds, and as most of you know, I'm a banker and a finance person, so when it went way down in the weeds, even I was like, ooh, what's down there? So, thanks everyone for hanging in there and for having a good discussion after. As Pete mentioned, our vision is, so now as of today, we've met with what we consider kind of every stakeholder, every group of stakeholders, the residents, the different employee groups, and so what we're picturing is, we think we're gonna need a working group of less than 70 people. Maybe that's a couple people from each of those groups, so maybe we're talking about a group of 8 or 10 people probably. To make sure that everybody, it's like we've kind of met with each group individually, now you gotta bring all those people together to make sure everybody's seeing everybody else's perspective on the issue and a menu of solutions. And what we ultimately want is a menu of choices of things we could do so that we can pick and hopefully come up with, piece together the right combination for our city. So, as Pete mentioned, hopefully everybody signed in. I think we asked for name and email address, I guess. I don't know if there's a phone number on there, but if you're interested, as you all know, and my husband always says, heaven help you if you stop and talk to me in a restaurant or something, because if I think you have good ideas, you go on my list of my husband says, careful, she'll put you on a committee. So, but if you're interested in being in that working group, you can let us know. You could mark your name back there, whatever you want to do, but please, if you're interested in doing that work with us and doing that work for the city, I can assure you it's a great way to be engaged in the city. It's a super important issue, so we'd love to know if you're interested. And if not, don't worry, I'll pick my own volunteers.
Half the magic in the battle is education. And if we don't know what's going on, and we don't know what our limitations are, and we don't collaborate together, then we're not doing it in transparency, and we're doing it in the back room, and you're not involved. Yes. Is there a state problem? Of course there is. Yes. Is there a national problem? Of course there is. Does that mean we should put our head in the sand, not address the issues, not forcefully try and keep our debt under control, respect our employees while trying to mutually solve the problem? Absolutely, we should do that. And we should stay focused together on remapping, pointing ahead in our future. There's no question that we have the debt, but if we continue to ignore it and let it rise and say, oh, the state will somehow solve my problem and pay my debt for me, we're going to end up with a $100 million debt scratching our head, all wondering who, we're going to all split it and pay it off. So, now I can tell you that we have the courage to dig in and work on this. Even with the limitations of CalPERS that are there, to work on figuring out alternate solutions. And I think we should be careful not to jump to conclusions and jump to solutions. The first thing everybody says when they hear pension reform is they immediately say, are you going to get rid of our police department? We can't even talk about percentages or dollars or numbers or debt, and it goes straight to, are you going to get rid of our police department? Whoa, folks, chill. We understand the needs of our city, we understand the preferences of our residents. We have to collaboratively work together between residents, employees, and us to find equitable solutions and not immediately jump into the pool. So, thank you for coming, thank you for helping. We absolutely will be transparent with you, we will be collaborative. I hope we can set up another one of these when we're, most of the way through these efforts. If you want to jump in and help us, please do. And thank you most of all for putting up with a hot room and listening to people.
Thank you.